Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Senior Pentagon officials led by Army Secretary Dan Driscoll arrived in Kyiv to meet President Zelensky and discuss efforts to end the war with Russia. This visit comes as reports emerge of a new peace plan and after a Russian strike killed at least 26 people in Ternopil. The Kremlin has said that there are no formal peace talks with the United States on Ukraine, adding it has nothing new to say about a reported 28-point plan. Moscow insists any settlement must address what it calls the root causes of the war and criticizes European nuclear rhetoric, while noting Putin does not use AI himself. President Donald Trump says he has signed a bill requiring the release of government documents on Jeffrey Epstein. Trump, who had earlier opposed the measure, announces on Truth Social that he has just signed the bill. Hamas has condemned new Israeli airstrikes in Gaza as a dangerous escalation, warning they threaten an already fragile ceasefire. Israel says the strikes respond to a Hamas violation, while medics report at least 25 people killed in the latest attacks. The Israeli military says Hezbollah is violating a ceasefire by rebuilding operations in southern Lebanon. Near the Israeli border, it says dozens of sites, including headquarters and weapons stores in civilian homes, have been identified around the village of Beit Lif. A Philippine court sentences former mayor Alice Guo to life imprisonment after finding her guilty of human trafficking. Authorities say Guo, later identifies as Chinese national Guo Huaping, ran for office under a false Filipino identity. Sudan's army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan says he is ready to work with the United States and Saudi Arabia on efforts to end the conflict. His council thanks regional mediators and says it will seriously engage in pursuit of lasting peace. Gunmen stormed a church in Kwara State, killing 2 people and kidnapping the pastor and several worshippers, as police say. The attack comes days after a massive abduction of schoolgirls and amid growing pressure on Nigeria from President Trump over Christian persecution. Now we start with the Middle East. Qatar, one of the central mediators in the Hamas-Israel war, is condemning a new wave of Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza Strip, warning they could destabilize the fragile truce that has held for several weeks. In a statement, Qatar's foreign ministry has called the strikes brutal attacks and a dangerous escalation, saying they threaten to undermine the ceasefire agreement that Doha has been working to sustain. The condemnation comes after a Gaza hospital reported 4 people killed in fresh strikes earlier today. This follows that what officials say was one of the deadliest days since the truce began on October 10th, with Gaza's Civil Defense Agency reporting 27 deaths on Wednesday alone. Israel and Hamas continue to accuse each other of violating the ceasefire, with Israel insisting its strikes are targeting Hamas positions, while Gaza's health ministry says more than 312 Palestinians have been killed during the truce period. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us again. Good to see you. Mark, what do you think, what are the challenges that mediators like Qatar are facing when a truce appears to be faltering so often? How much influence can external actors realistically exert on the behavior of Israel and Hamas right now?
Asuma, good to be with you again. Well, let's just put the cards on the table. One of the things that Qatar can stop doing is to actually oversee the funding of Hamas, as the leadership were there of Hamas for a number of years, living high on the hog in some very expensive hotels. before people turn around and go, "Oh, you're making that up." Well, people go and do the research and the history of that. They played it both sides. You have used a very interesting term when you've said like a ceasefire. Yes, this is a ceasefire. What happens is part of this 20 plan, part of the we've just seen the UN resolution, but the 20-point plan that the Trump administration has put forward is to then see that Hamas will be they will give up all their guns and they will be completely disarmed, and that another group will then group of nations will then oversee that, and then the governance of Gaza. They have not given up their weapons whatsoever, and true to form, um, in my humble opinion, they have no intention of doing so. Also, with what is happening with this whole discussion of the yellow line, is that they are pushing back all the time. It's what then the IDF are then finding, whether it's finding rocket launchers, other ammunitions, other military hardware within right up to that yellow line that has been demarcated there, and they are then going to take those out. Hamas need to disarm. That is what is number one there. And Qatar, as I've said, without sounding repetitive, they have spoken out of both sides of their mouth in the regard that, oh yes, we can moderate, we want a peace deal, but at the same time being funded this, as they have funded many things around the world in regard to into universities, and then pushing all the marches that have then happened over the last 2 years in regard to the rhetoric that we have seen in capital cities all over the world. Asuma.
Yes, and Mark, what do you think? As you rightfully mentioned, that demilitarization of Hamas, it looks like it's not even close to demilitarization of Hamas. Why do you think the peace or the peace talks of or pursuing the second phase continues while the demilitarization hasn't happened? Why do you think that some actors mediating have given up on demilitarizing Hamas?
You ask a very, very important question, and the
Thank you.
other important question to ask everyone or to lay out on the table, it's how we view people. We view a Middle Eastern mindset from a Western point of view, and we then put that within our values and think, oh, if you negotiate, people are going, oh yes, we will do this, but within the Middle East, but they won't. It comes down to strength, and Hamas as you and I just agree, have no intention, in my humble opinion, of then putting down their weapons. With then Israel has got huge issues again, and I stood on both borders recently in regard to the south and the north. But if you then go to Lebanon, and the Hezbollah are then rearming. There are huge issues again. So people may say one thing, and then their actions will do another, and the only thing that they will respond to is strength, and that is what Israel is then showing. We've asked you to do this, you're not, so we will then take actions against you, and that is down in Gaza, and that will also be with Hezbollah as well. And all of this just has to be honestly said, and has to be unpacked constantly as a reminder. And this sadly is where we're at. At the end of the day, you only have to read the Hamas charter, and then within the charter it talks about the complete annihilation of Israel, which is the Jewish homeland. That is where we're at. Asuma.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic now. Hamas is accusing Israel of violating the current ceasefire by pushing military positions beyond what is known as the Yellow Line, the agreed boundary behind which Israeli forces were required to pull back Speaking today, Hamas's spokesperson Hazem Qasim has said that Israeli troops are working daily to shift that line westwards, calling it a clear breach of both the ceasefire and the maps included in President Trump's published plan. Qasim has urged international mediators to intervene immediately, saying Israel's actions show blatant disregard for the diplomatic efforts underway. Has added that the yellow line must be restored to its original position if the ceasefire is to hold. Now we welcome back Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mark, for staying with us. Now, we were just discussing how what's the situation is looking like over there. How does this conflicting claims of continuous ceasefire violations by both Israel and Hamas, how do you think this is shaping international responses now?
Well, of course, it's shaping that, but it all depends. What your particular views are. The thing is, this is within regard to Egypt, Qatar, Turkey. They are not friends with Israel one iota, and let's just be honest about that and put that on the table. The IDF has been into Gaza, the most horrific urban warfare that you would have to fight. They have then had to come against a tunnel system that, if you combine the London Underground and the New York Underground system, you might even just about get to what Hamas have actually built. They've taken all that money that the EU and various other countries around the world, and they have then taken that and then built this tunnel system to then, within their dream, as I just said earlier, is to wipe Israel off the face of the earth and get rid of the Jewish homeland. That's it. That is what their mindset is. So when you are dealing with that kind of mindset, the only thing that you can respond to is strength. We go back to the 7th of October 2023. You go back to the 6th of October 2023. There was peace there, you could say, and of course, rockets had regularly come over from Gaza, and having visited the Gaza envelope recently, and you walk into a kibbutzim, and then you find out that there were 400 people living there, and 200 of those are dead now or taken hostage. This is the reality on the ground. The Israelis withdrew in 2005 and gave the Palestinians then their own land to then make that into a homeland, make it into a beautiful Mediterranean holiday resort. They chose not to do that. They chose to turn it into a rocket launch pad. All of these things have to be reminded of, and also to remember, just quickly, that Egypt had not facilitated at all anyone moving from Gaza into their country, so they would not suffer of any military action that, of course, Hamas started on the 7th of October. They have not done that. When you pick through all of the history, all of the facts, it comes down to one thing. They do not want to live peacefully at all with Israel. You then have to go through Erdogan of Turkey's rhetoric to then back that up. Unfortunately, people don't like facts and they don't like history, and that is what we then have to talk about. Asuma.
Right. Thank you very much, Mark, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on to Europe, Ukraine is reportedly expected to give up land and some arms under a U.S. peace plan, which also includes cutting the size of Ukraine's armed forces. Now, Washington wants Kyiv to accept the main points of the peace plan to end the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia. These peace plan proposals have come in as Ukraine faces aggressive Russian territorial gains in its eastern regions. According to some reports, Ukraine initially received signals about the peace U.S. plan, but did not participate in drafting it. The White House has declined to comment on the matter. In all of this, it is important to note that the Russian President Vladimir Putin has been consistent about his demands, which is that Ukraine must renounce NATO membership. Russia also wants Ukraine to withdraw troops from 4 disputed provinces. Meanwhile, in the latest development, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has held talks with Turkish President Erdogan in Turkey's Ankara. Now, Turkey is ready to provide a platform for continued talks. The Kremlin has assured that President Putin is open to discussions with the U.S. and Turkey. Additionally, U.S. delegation led by Army Secretary Dan Driscoll and General Randy George is currently in Kyiv. They will meet Ukrainian President Zelensky to review the proposals and verify the other factual details on the ground. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mark, for staying with us. Now, Mark, realistically, how effective could this be, these, 28-point peace plan by U.S. For brokering or trying to broker a ceasefire between U.S. and, Russia and Ukraine? How do you think reportedly requiring Ukraine to cede territory, do you think this whole is feasible?
The number one thing is, as you and I have constantly discussed over the last few months on this channel, is to say we want this war to stop. It cannot be denied. February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Behind the scenes, the whole discussion has been about this is how far we have come. This is what we want in regard to taking 20% of the land of Ukraine, which they then have held to this point. We need these people to get round the table and to be serious about that. We know of the appalling losses that the Ukrainians have held, and also in regard to the destruction of towns and villages. The number one thing is we want it to end, and we want it to end now, whether we can bring these people to the table. But of course, understandably, the Russians have said, where their Foreign Minister Lavrov has said, that there has been a peace deal on the table since January, February of 2024. And understandably, the Ukrainians are going, hold on a minute, we have lost a lot of men, but also and women, and the destruction. And we would like some of the land, we would like our territory back. That hence why it's difficult to get these people around the table to agree this. But assuming that may be happening, there's all sorts of conversations going on behind the scenes. In regard to NATO, that has always been an interesting discussion, because for some historians we have felt that the agreement of Germany coming together was the agreement which Gorbachev said, yep, let's go ahead with this, as long as you don't expand NATO right up to the Russian borders. Then certain historians would deny that was ever said or was ever put in print. And again, it's going back into history and looking at how we have actually got to this point. Assuming.
Right. Thank you very much, Mark, for sharing that insight. Now we move on to EU. Hungary's Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó has said that the European Union should hold financial support to the Ukrainian government following new corruption reports. He made these statements in Brussels ahead of a meeting with his European Union counterparts. His comments came a day after Ukraine's parliament dismissed 2 ministers who were caught up in a major corruption investigation. The probe centers on an alleged $100 million scheme involving contracts at the State Nuclear Energy Agency. This case has intensified public outrage over long-standing corruption concerns, including within President Volodymyr Zelensky's inner circle. Szijjártó said the situation in Ukraine does not look promising at this time. His remarks added to the broader debate within the European Union over future support for Kyiv. As they arrived for the same meeting, the Swedish Foreign Minister Maria Malmer Stenergaard and Poland's Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski had said any future peace plan for Ukraine must include the European Union. This discussion comes as EU member states continue to assess political, financial, and security implications of the war and the ongoing corruption investigation in Ukraine. Now, for this discussion, we welcome back Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mark, for staying with us. Mark, now looking at this and Hungary's fresh calls to halt funding, what do you think this is revealing about the fatigue and about the division within the EU for supporting Ukraine further?
Again, in Hungary's case, dear Viktor Orbán, who has a tremendous history in regard to dealing with Russia and dealing with communism, he's also wanting to keep open a relationship with Russia because Hungary relies on getting its energy, buying oil, etc., from Russia. That immediately has to be put on the table. The last thing that anyone wants is fraud. One of the people that have been accused also owns 50% of Zelensky's production company in the past. So that has to be said here as well. Any fraud is wrong, and that is a deep concern from a number of people. And in many ways, you don't know what to believe at times when there is the accusations, as President Zelensky bought a house here, etc. There is so many billions and billions of dollars, pounds, and other money that has gone into the Ukraine. And also, it's important that you keep the receipts. We need to know where the money has gone. And in any situation like this, sadly, it ends up falling into the wrong hands. But you know as well as I do that a few weeks ago, Budapest said, look, let's get Russia and Ukraine round the table in our country. And I think that was said in extremely good faith because of the political walk that Viktor Orbán has to then walk with all the countries that surround him, and that is said in all sincerity. And he's also, understandably, like other countries, calling out the fraud, which has to be said. Now, on the other hand, some people are saying that behind the scenes, in regards to Zelensky, there is now a push to oust him and get him out of power.
Yes.
That discussion is also going on. Depending on where you get your news sources from, and how you then weigh up the people that come out with that opinion as well. There is a lot of chatter, a lot of info out there that we have to constantly go through to find out what the truth is.
Yes, it's becoming harder and harder to filter the truth. Thank you very much, Mark Sutherland, for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news as a geopolitical commentator from London. Now we have a breaking news. The International Atomic Energy Agency has passed a new resolution pressing Iran to immediately provide full access and information about its nuclear program, in line with United Nations Security Council requirements. The measure was introduced by the United States and the E3, which is Britain, France, and Germany, and was adopted by the IAEA Board of Governors with 19 votes in favor, 3 against, and 20 abstentions. The resolution urges Iran to comply fully and without delay with its legal obligations and to grant inspectors the access and documentation they have been requesting for months. Diplomats say the text specifically calls on Iran to update the agency on the status of its enriched uranium stockpile and the condition of nuclear facilities that were bombed in previous attacks. The vote comes amid growing international concerns over Iran's expanding enrichment activity and a widening gap between Tehran and the IAEA. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Yossi Cooper-Wasser. He's an Israeli intelligence and security expert, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Yossi, for joining us again. Good to see you. Yossi, now Thank you. Yossi, now looking at Iran and IAEA, do you think Iran will let IAEA access their nuclear facilities again? And how long do you think this will take for the IAEA to be to get access to Iran's nuclear program again?
Well, so far it doesn't seem that the Iranians are willing to allow the IAEA inspectors access to the facilities that were hit by the Israelis and the Americans back in June. And it's clear that the facilities were severely hit, but the main question left open is what happened to the highly enriched uranium, the 60% that the Iranians had plenty of, more than 450 kilograms of such highly enriched uranium. And the Iranians refuse to give any details. I'm not sure that they know themselves, but they don't allow access to the places where they have stocked this quantity. And although it was attacked by Israel and the Americans, it's not clear what happened to them. And the Iranians refuse to allow access. And the reaction to this IAEA decision is just very negative. And they deny the request and threaten to take steps against the international community. That's what we have until now.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Yossi Cooper-Wasser for joining us and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our next news. A bipartisan U.S. commission has said that China ran a disinformation campaign to hurt sales of French Rafale fighter jets after India used the planes in May, and the first time against Chinese weapons deployed by its neighbor Pakistan. More than half a dozen countries have bought the Rafale, whose reputation took a hit this year when Pakistan's Chinese-made J-10 fighter shot down at least one Rafale used by India during a 4-day conflict between the neighbors. As per U.S. reports, China used fake social media accounts to share AI-generated images, as well as video games images of supposed debris of aircraft that Chinese weaponry had destroyed. Meanwhile, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has slammed the report as false. Now for this discussion, we welcome retired Major General G.T. Dwivedi. He's an international and defense expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Major General, for joining us again. Thank you. Good to see you. Major General, what are we to make of this Chinese disinformation campaign targeting this particular Rafale fighter jet? Can you tell us what exactly is this, or how significant is Rafale fighter jet, and what are the broader geopolitical implications of this disinformation being used to influence military balances?
Well, Azuma, this report of U.S.-China Economic Security Review Commission does not come as a surprise. In fact, it only substantiates what the French intelligence had also reported, that Chinese have tried to tarnish the image and the reputation of the Rafale fighters. Well, just before I give you a very specific answer, having served in China as a defense attaché, I can say with certain amount of conviction that Chinese have a policy of gray zone warfare, in that the key elements are propaganda, psychological warfare, and of course, misinformation warfare along with legal means. So Chinese has just only pursued the well-known policy in the case of the Rafale. Now coming to this specific case, the Rafale is a reputed, fighter jet of 4.5 generation, and India used it very effectively during Op Sindoor and caused considerable damage both to the terrorist infrastructure and also the Pakistani forces and their air bases. Now Chinese J-20 fighter is in competition with the other top of the line aircraft. They have J-20, which is a stealth fighter, and J-35, which is export version. So more in question is the J-35, because they were trying to sell this aircraft to a couple of countries, including Indonesia. So they found that Rafale is a competitor, so they resorted to the misinformation campaign and even showed AI-generated images and clips in which they showed that one of the Rafale was shot down by the Chinese PL-15 missile. Now the point is that Chinese are a big arm exporter, and they would like to capture as much market as possible. And they always go into such games where they play false narrative, false campaign to project their own equipment. And in fact, the Chinese diplomatic corps also plays a major role. In fact, in number of embassies, the Chinese ambassadors and their diplomatic staff also played this same narrative and trying to project that the Chinese equipment got better of the Western equipment when there was a standoff between India and Pakistan during Operation Sindoor. Asuma.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Major General Gigi Dwivedi for joining us today as an international relations and defense expert from New Delhi. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Europe. Spanish court has ordered Facebook owner Meta to pay 479 million euros to digital media outlets for unfair competition and violating European Union data protection rules. The payment will go to 87 publishers and news agencies in Spain. The ruling stems from Meta's use of personal data for behavioral advertising on Facebook and Instagram, which the court said gave the company a significant competitive advantage in the online advertising market. The case focused on Meta's change of legal basis for data processing when the GDPR took effect in 2018. During that period, Meta switched from user consent to claiming data processing that was necessary for contract performances, a basis later deemed inadequate. The judge has estimated that Meta earned at least 5.3 billion euros in profits during those 5 years. The ruling is subjected to appeal and is part of a series of European investigations and fines against Meta. Last year, the European Commission fined the company nearly 800 million euros for unfair business practices linked to Facebook Marketplace. Spanish authorities, including Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, are also investigating Meta for allegedly tracking Android users' web activity. Meta has not immediately commented, but said it will cooperate with Spanish officials. And that's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.